Brilliant. Hello, everyone. I think we're all set up now. Probably some other people still joining, so we'll give it a second before we start the proper Q&A. But thank you so much for joining us. Welcome, everyone. And this is welcome to this week's session of Ask Me Anything. This one focusing on QA in DevOps. I'm Jim Cowdrey. I'm part of the ECS digital team, and I'll hand you over to the panel in a moment to get them to introduce themselves, our panel of experts. But before we do that, hopefully you can start popping your questions in the chat box. We'll do our best to answer as many as we can over the next hour, and look forward to hearing what questions you have for us. In the meantime, whilst you're all just adding your questions, I'll give you a quick introduction to ECS for anyone who hasn't heard of us or hasn't been on any of our other Ask Me Anything sessions. So we are a leading provider of digital transformation services and have been since 2008 when we were founded. Now we have over 650 staff in the UK and also some small operations overseas in Pune and also Singapore. Our core areas of focus are under the sort of digital transformation banner, really, I guess, data and analytics, customer experience, and also digital engineering. And it's really the digital engineering that we're sort of talking about today. We're very much agile heart of anything we do in terms of digital engineering, but also very much take a test-first approach to all of our sort of digital engineering projects, often implementing things like BDD, ATDD, and continuous testing as part of our engagements. So that really brings us on to our topic, which is this week, like I say, QA in DevOps. And I'll pass you over to our panel to introduce themselves. Ali, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So my name's Ali. I'm a delivery consultant up in Edinburgh for ECS. I work on a project just now in a large financial institution where we are developing security controls in AWS. Before starting it at ECS, I was more of a QA engineer or an SDET, and I'm heavily involved in the testing community on Twitter and like to spend time speaking at conferences and speaking to different people about testing and QA in general.
Great, thanks, Ali. Alex?
Hi everyone, I'm Alex. I work in delivery assurance at ECS. I'm fairly new to ECS, being here just nearly 3 months now. Prior to working at ECS, I've spent a lot of time in retail organisations and with test consultancies, and basically all of my experience over the last, scary now, 20 probably plus years has been around testing and quality.
I guess I'm last.
Yeah.
So hello, I'm Matthew.
Last, Matthew.
I'm a test architect at ECS Digital, and for the last couple of years, I've been working at the Times newspaper as a team lead. My time here was mostly focused around building test tooling to enable and support faster feedback to developers. More recently, I've been helping an enterprise energy supplier build an application from scratch. I'm pleased to say that we were able to achieve full continuous delivery on this application, and we could release any part in under 10 minutes. Finally, I'm currently working on defining a QA approach for multiple teams for the same organization.
Brilliant. Thanks, Matt. Much appreciated. So we've got some questions starting to come in. Thanks so much, guys, for posting those. Let's just start with the first one. So with DevOps, how can we gain confidence from business stakeholders, project managers during the transition phase?
So I can start off on this one.
Thanks, Ali.
I think it's about making small changes for me anyway. It depends obviously whether it's a top-down transformation or whether you're wanting to transform this from within your team. But if you're wanting to push change from within your team, it's about making small changes to your processes first of all, and showing the benefit of those changes. And sometimes it's almost about doing it by stealth. So if you're wanting to, for example, get some automated tests up and running in a CI/CD pipeline, then it's about implementing that as part of your workflow, and then showing the benefit of having those tests to your stakeholders or product managers. and that will hopefully buy confidence with them and build trust with them. And then from there, you can begin to expand that out.
Yeah, I'll chip in and add to that. I think it's also like start with why. So why would you want to go on a journey where you're going to be able to deliver more frequently and bring value into your business by reducing lead and cycle times? Ultimately, you know, the goal of any business is to make money, and by going on this journey, you can deliver value more quickly. And that's a pretty compelling argument for anybody. So you can take a lot of people on the journey by just sort of starting with, you know, that simple question is, why would we want to do this?
I'm going to chip in as well. So this is the kind of thing I'm dealing with currently. So what I've done is lead by example. So the work that I was doing on a previous project and enabled continuous delivery, we were able to deploy anything in 10 minutes with confidence. And I use it as an example to other people in the business as a reason why, and sort of leverage. So, you know, everyone wants to release faster, as Alex was saying. So that's been my approach.
Okay, well, I think this next question probably leads on from that really, and from the same person actually, but all about confidence, and I guess what you were just saying, Matt, about you know, delivering quickly, but you know, how do you get the confidence, or how do you give the confidence, I suppose, that frequent changes don't mean that they will get a frequently broken system, even though they know there's a lot of automation in place?
I'll just go quickly on this. I think the whole thing is you know, from sort of lean principles, is focus on small batch size, and basically, if moving away from large high risk releases, if you can develop and deliver quickly, you know, in 10 minutes, like Matt says, if you do have a problem, then you can roll back really quickly. So focusing on having the right tools and capability to roll back really quickly gives you the confidence that we can make this change, even though we think we'll have tested it really, really well. But if anything does go wrong, we can just undo that and we can be where we were before 10 minutes ago.
I would say as well, just team feeling. Now, if you feel as a team that you can deliver a change and you know it's not going to break, or you're getting the confidence from the automation pack or whatever you're doing to give you that confidence, that's quite a good indicator, I find. You know, teams know what parts of the applications aren't that good or tend to be a bit flaky or break.
Great.
Yeah, and I think I agree with both of you. But also having confidence in the automation that is in place, that it will tell you if something major is broken, is a massive part of that. And sometimes one of the ways to show that is, if something does break, did we have a test around that? And if we don't, can we add that back in? And also having faith in your monitoring tools and alerting tools as well, to let you know that as soon as something goes wrong, you're getting immediate feedback so that you can act on that. And as Alex says, recover quickly from that.
Absolutely. Okay. And actually, I think another question that sort of follows on was something that we were sort of talking about before the call, really, which was around, you know, automation, and whether you guys think that you know, DevOps can actually bring too much focus on automation, you know, within QA and test. Yeah, be great to hear your views on that, guys.
I think in you can jump in, Ali. I think in the test community, this is a really big thorny topic of conversation. You know, covering over what we've discussed a little bit, it's really important in DevOps that we can get really fast feedback on the changes that we're making, and automation and checking of those changes is really, really essential. But I don't think, I mean, I'm always been an advocate of the human critique of software. I don't think we're ever going to get away from a place where people, testers, have to have a look at the products and the systems they're building and just have that human evaluation. So we need to focus on automation, but again, exploratory testing at all stages of our DevOps life cycle is really important, and humans need to be involved in eyeballing those things.
And not just testing or exploratory testing the application, but also the requirements as well is very valuable. Getting involved right in the early stages of when you're actually defining what the software looks like, getting a shared understanding of how things or how features should and should not work in you know, free Amigo sessions or backlog refinement.
Yeah, I was speaking about this earlier in the week, and I think one of the things, if you look at the definition of what continuous testing is, it is focusing pretty much entirely on automation. But I don't think that's right. I don't know if anyone's seen the famous, now famous Dan Ashby diagram where you've got the DevOps symbol and then it says we test here, and you test everywhere within that DevOps infinity loop. And I think that reflects it quite well for me, because as you're saying, Matt, as testers getting involved in the requirement stages is massively important, because having a shared understanding and making sure there aren't any unsaid assumptions being said or being made, by the team is massively important, because that can lead to a lot of waste further down the line. Because if you're catching bugs through your automated tests, then sometimes that requires a lot of rework, whereas you could prevent those bugs almost by having those discussions up front and making sure the team really understands what it is that you're wanting to deliver.
Yeah, it's that classic curve, isn't it, really, I suppose, of finding bugs at different stages of the life cycle and the effort to actually fix them, really, isn't it? Brilliant, thanks, guys. Just to say to everyone, yeah, please keep your questions coming in. It's been great so far. Next one, taking a slightly different tack, I guess. How would you guys say that you can enable continuous delivery or a continuous delivery environment as a tester, or what role does the tester play in that?
Okay, so for me, it's to pull as much of the verification of the application to the pull request as possible. So make sure anything getting merged into a main branch or being deployed somewhere, you already have a high confidence that it's not going to break the system in some particular way. So things like pull request environments are amazing for doing this. Repeatable state that you can sort of test against is very important. Test data is another big topic. I'm not going to go into it too much now because it's such a large thing to talk about. But yeah, trying to get as much verification as you can into the pull request before you merge anywhere is what I found to be really useful.
Yeah, I think a lot of it comes down to the culture of the team as well. Make sure that people are committing frequently, and when we are developing new functionality or new features, it's in as small a chunk as possible, and that really helps aid the fast feedback aspect of continuous delivery.
Anything to add on that one then, Alex? Or?
No, nothing really to add on that.
Okay. Well, actually, I mean, picking up on what Ali just mentioned around the cultural piece, I've got another question here around culture, and I guess we're looking at this from a QA testing lens. But how much or what role does culture have in the DevOps adoption process? And like I say, I guess from a QA and testing view.
Well, I'll go first on that one. Everyone's going to say that culture is really important, but it is absolutely essential that you start to foster the right culture for change. So I think, the transformations that we see organizations go through, and I don't think anybody who's on this call, it would be in an organization that isn't seeing anything change, is, it can start from the bottom up and it can start from top down. But fundamentally, you are going to have some strong leadership. It's really essential that you get leaders in place who can be real advocates of change and move through the things that testers and devs and tech people are going to really struggle with changing, like where the governance needs to change, or how the money works needs to change. You're going to have people that can influence across and up in an organization to help you with some of those transformational things. And from a tech person sort of level, from a tester level, I think you need to make sure that you're in a organization and a culture where they support continuous learning. That's absolutely essential. And that doesn't mean, spending weeks and months training, going on formal training courses. It can be as small as following people on Twitter or just listening to a podcast while you're going for a walk. Making sure that there's continuous learning and strong leadership and the desire for the people in your organization to change is really essential. And that doesn't come overnight. You just need to make sure that there's enough of you to make that, you know, sort of start that bow wave of change?
Yeah, I think I totally agree with Alex. I think on one side, we as testers or as tech people need to want to change and want to adapt to learning new technologies and almost stretching our skill sets. But on the other hand, companies need to be willing to, and leaders need to be willing to give people time to learn these new tools and technologies and concepts. But back to on the original question, I think a lot of people focus when they're moving to DevOps, they'll focus on the tools, but what needs to precede that is the culture. So a lot of people will use a new testing tool, for example, and say, actually, this isn't working for us. This isn't having the change that we would expect. But sometimes that's because the culture and the process didn't precede that. The tool isn't going to be, no tools are a silver bullet. So that's why the culture is so important for moving to a DevOps environment.
Yeah, something I've personally found is that a lot of developers don't really value testing as a whole. They don't really see how it benefits them. They just want to deliver code. But in actual fact, testing is mostly for them to validate the changes that they're creating. So as a developer, I want to make these changes. I want to have the fast feedback to tell me that what I'm doing hasn't broken the system in some particular way. And once that kind of clicks to them, they actually start to appreciate testing a bit more. I found we've worked closer together. And that's been really useful for me.
Yeah, so you're saying that's changing then with DevOps. You know, you're, like you say, developers are appreciating testing more. Now you're all working part of one collaborative team, and they understand more about what testers are doing.
There does seem to be as well this disconnect between dev and test. So at my last project, my first week of joining, I remember reviewing a pull request from a developer. I left like 30, 40 comments on this pull request. It was not great code. And they were shocked that a QA engineer had commented on their code, almost like offended. It's mad.
Maybe we should have invited some developers on this session to give their opinion. Sorry, Alex, were you going to say something?
No, I was just going to add about the culture, I think, and it can start in your team and you can foster this, but you need to make your work environment a place where it is safe to fail. And that goes back to that learning. You know, it's okay to try stuff and it's okay to get it wrong as long as you learn from that. And I think that's really important for testers to make sure that they find themselves or they work on making that team's a safe place to be.
I think going back to Matt's point as well about the developer being surprised that a QA engineer would comment on the code. I think when teams transitioned to Agile, obviously the idea was that the silos would be broken down and you'd have people would be more cross-functional and working together, and there wouldn't be like set roles within teams. But having worked in a couple of my previous roles, I don't know how true that is and how well people are taking advantage of the fact that Agile does break down silos and DevOps breaks down silos as well. People still seem, well, a number of companies and organizations still seem stuck. It's like you're set in an Agile team, but you're still almost stuck in that same role that you were in before. It's just done in a smaller cycle rather than waiting weeks for work. You're waiting a couple of days, but it's still like very much people are stuck in their own definition of their own role.
That's an interesting point. Brilliant. Thanks, guys. We've got some more questions coming in. I'll just go on to the next one if that's okay. Do you see QA being just testing or also encompassing pipeline?
So I personally feel that QA encompasses everything from software development, pipeline delivery. If you can't figure out how something's built and deployed, and how can you test it effectively? The more technical I've got over the years, the more I've done like AWS exams, I've done development courses, the more I've learned about how software is built and deployed, delivered. My testing has got so much better over time.
Yeah, I think testers should definitely be looking to get involved everywhere as much as possible. I know there's obviously some projects that have restrictions on time, for example, but as Matt was saying, the more you understand about what it is you're developing, how it's being designed, the technology it's being hosted on, the tech you're using as your CI/CD tools, for example, the better job you can do because you have a much bigger picture of how everything works and how everything ties together. and you can use that to inform the types of tests that you're going to be running, and that can only be a good thing for teams.
Yeah, I think as the role of testers changes, and we've seen that really accelerate over the last 4, 5, 6 years, is you have to be an advocate for quality throughout the pipeline, throughout the life cycle of your product or code. And that's everything from having the conversations up front with architects or tech leads about how you make your product testable, all the way through to the conversations about how you monitor software and test in production. You should be an advocate for having the right conversations throughout that whole DevOps infinite loop.
And sorry, slightly going off piece there, Alex, but would you say that that's a slightly different kind of role almost, being a true advocate for quality within that, cross-functional team, as opposed to, someone who's focusing on testing or somebody who's focusing on test automation?
I think
as your role in the old sort of world, possibly.
I think if you in the modern DevOps continuous delivery world, if you're just focused on just testing of the product or the code that's handed over to you from dev, yeah, that's good, but I don't think it's enough now. And I think the role, as I said, the role of that tester is changing. So I think if people want to develop, it's learning about how you can advocate for quality, how you can have the right conversations throughout that life cycle. Otherwise, I think people can be left behind. There is no doubt. I think I think I've seen it in previous organisations that we all need to be more technically adept. That doesn't mean that we all have to write production-ready code, but for a tester's perspective, it's really important that if you pair with a dev, you can understand the code that they're writing, and particularly as we do more and more automation, then you're going to be able to have to write your own frameworks and stuff like that. So the role is changing. It's changing in lots of different ways.
I think, yeah, so going back to your point about the quality advocate, Alex, there's a school of thought, it comes from the modern testing principles, based on it came from a podcast called A/B Testing by Alan Page and Brent Jensen, and that talks about the role of the tester or QA becoming more of a coach. So I think being able to talk to developers or other roles within your team about how you test, how you do it, what types of tests you want to run, pairing with them on testing, it can really help sort of share that testing activity across the team. And I think if we were to stick to just being the people that test at a more mature version of the product, if you like, as it moves further down the pipeline, then we're going to become a bottleneck. So that's where learning more and getting involved at different stages and working closer with developers and breaking down those silos, getting them involved in testing, that's why that becomes so important, because then testing is done throughout the development process. It doesn't necessarily just have to be done by us as testers.
Great. Thanks, Ali. We've got another question that's come in. What do you think is better, reactive metrics-based testing approach, fixing after the release if errors appear a few times, or proactive, each release is tested before going out? I think I know what the answer is going to be from you guys, but who wants to go first?
So I think everything needs to be, it depends on the context, right? If you're doing a proof of concept for a demo, for example, you might not want to have rigorous testing. You'll probably have testing in place as you're doing your unit tests and stuff and practicing TDD. But I think everything needs to be tested before it goes out. I think fixing after the release based on errors, it can be interpreted as you leaving it for the customers to find bugs, almost, or the people who are using your software to find bugs. And that's not always a great experience for them. I'm a big fan of releasing as early as possible and getting fast feedback on it, but what you're releasing needs to work. And even if it's limited in its functionality, but it still needs to work at a basic level. So you're always, and testing is one way that you can ensure that happens. So I think testing definitely needs to be done.
Yeah, I'd add really small thing to that is it depends on the risk, right? So, there's not much more to say than that. If you're not going to cause a massive outage to your business, and you've only got a few users, then why not? But if you're going to have a monetary impact, or there's health, what's the word? Health implications, or you need to be really, really careful. So yeah, it depends.
Yeah, I haven't got anything to add further to that.
Okay, thanks guys. Yeah, I guess it goes back to that what we were saying as well earlier about cost of fixing defects and things like that. If you're finding them once it's gone live, that's another sort of implication, I guess. Moving on, if I may. So I guess going back to the core principles of what this discussion is about today, to a certain extent, one of the questions here is what is the role of a tester in a sort of DevOps team, effectively?
I think we touched on it in the last question, but I think Ali hit the nail on the head around moving to being a quality coach, and that doesn't get away from the fact that you are going to have to set up your automation frameworks and get your feedback as fast as possible.
Yeah, for me, it's about collaborating as much as possible at as many stages of the development process as you can, and getting involved there, having your input as a tester. So for example, if developers writing unit tests, they should traditionally have been putting their test might just be testing the happy path, for example, and in one variable. But if you can get involved early on, and you can start doing sort of like boundary testing and things like that at the unit test stage as well. So yeah, it's about getting involved and working with as many and collaborating with as many different people within the team as possible.
Yeah, again, I haven't got anything further to add.
Great. Next one then. Next one is, how can you break down some of the silos that still exist in organizations?
I'll chip in on that one to start with. I think that it's education and information and influence. I think it's really important to talk to wide audiences across your IT spectrum about what it is you're trying to achieve and why you're trying to achieve it. But that isn't always received well, particularly from people from test background, for example. So one of the things I think is really important is to expand people's worldview. So make sure that you're bringing into your organization experience from other organizations where people have been through transformations and done really good work, and also to make sure that you've got people who are, for want of a better word, Luddites, or don't really want to change. You need to open their worldview and start getting people along to meetups and conferences, or just having a look at articles on LinkedIn or Twitter. There is a whole diaspora of different views of how stuff can and should be done out there, and I think you've just got to try and work really hard on opening people's minds to starting to have just getting different views and opinions, and you can start very, very small, and it's often those people that were anti stuff can be the biggest advocates for change, and I've definitely seen that in my last organization.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is about taking advantage of the really good relationships you do have at work. Sometimes you need an ally almost that'll help amplify your voice, is the word I'm looking for. So if you're talking about pairing with developers, for example, on unit tests, which is an example I gave before, then sitting with someone, proving that it works, proving what types of tests they're writing, and potentially any issues that it would have caught earlier than it would have if that didn't happen. Then getting people on your side and talking about how useful that is and how much they've enjoyed it, for example, is a good way of breaking down those silos. And I think as well, not trying to go in too heavy. So I'm always a big fan of making small changes at a time and kind of building them up. So yeah, just have the conversations with people. So that, and a lot of it's about empathy as well. So if you're wanting to, so for example, you might not totally understand what a developer does when you join a new team, or they might not totally understand what you do. So it's about having those conversations and gaining a shared understanding of what each other's role is and some of the challenges you face. and if you can develop empathy with that person, and they develop empathy with you, it makes them more likely to want to collaborate.
Just going back to Annie's point about pair programming, that's been one of the most useful things I've seen or done inside teams with developers. So one of the examples I can give was, I found a bug in the UI, and I wrote a UI test to cover that bug on a branch, and then sent that branch to a developer for him then to fix the bug and use that automation to actually validate the fix. And they loved that. I really, really enjoyed working in that way, almost like TDDing their bug almost. Yeah, that's something they really valued, and it brought us closer together, for sure.
I guess that comes back to the sort of business culture piece. I mean, slightly different question, but as somebody who's not sitting down in an organization as part of a Scrum team, I mean, when you guys are out working on projects, are you finding now that, and I know we're not doing that at the moment because we're all based at home, but are you finding that, testers are all sitting together still and devs are all sitting together still, and everyone's quite separate, or is it much more sort of collaborative to sort of help break down some of those silos?
I would say it depends on the client personally.
Depends,
some clients
don't mention names.
Places, but it's always worked best for me, and we've always been close together, working as one engineering team, not just dev or test, but just engineers working together to build some cool stuff.
Absolutely.
And I think, within our teams, obviously, we'll go in with different specialties. Like when we go into a client as a pod of like 4 or 5 people, then we'll obviously be working closely together to solve problems within the different roles. And I think when you show the benefits of that, sometimes that'll have a positive effect with the client you're working with as well.
Yeah, I sometimes feel like teams sort of see testers as like blockers to making progress and blocking developers, when actually we want to be more like enablers. We're enabling to make change and have confidence and not breaking stuff as I'm making those changes.
Okay. Well,
just going to add, I mean, I've seen, because I'm getting old and grey, as you can see now. I've seen huge changes over the last sort of 15, 20 years, from literally, the devs chucking stuff over to the stupid testers who can't even understand this, who are sat on a different floor with cheaper furniture, type of things, through where we are now with, pairing with devs and making sure that we've got the right physical setup, hard and out home, of course, but really thinking about how it is that we as testers and developers and everyone, not just testers and devs, but everyone can work and collaborate, and that's really important to think about that once people start to work again physically in the same location.
Great, thanks, Alex. So next question that's come in picks up on, I think, something that one of you said earlier about boundary value testing. How would you define a boundary in testing?
I think it was me that mentioned that. So I better answer this, right? So I think I spoke about it in the context of unit testing. So the example that I gave when I was speaking about this earlier in the week was, say, for example, you've got a password reset functionality and you can't use your previous 5 passwords as your new password because that would be insecure. If I wanted to test the boundaries of that, I would test that I can't use the 5th most recent password or the 4th. So I would always be pushing towards the end of the allowed values and then one beyond that. So, well, you can't go one beyond that when you're resetting password, obviously, because you're not storing the 6th. But yeah, sorry, you would. So you could test like the 6th most recently used password as well, and that should be allowed, but the 5th shouldn't. So it's about testing on the boundary of what's allowed and what's not.
I'm not going to say anything because that sounds like too much like an old I said type question, and I think Ali got it right and I'd have got it wrong. So. Yeah,
exactly. Who's passed is the question. Brilliant. Okay, thanks, guys. Thanks for all your questions, everyone. Please keep them coming in. The next one, and I think it sort of follows on from what Matt was saying about testing, obviously, often rather being seen as a blocker. But what do you think is the biggest blocker to more organizations moving to DevOps? And what role can testers help in that adoption?
I genuinely think it's a fear or uncertainty. A lot of places now will do what they're doing just because it's always been that way. So I think as testers, or as people who are interested in DevOps and good testing practices in DevOps, we can show the benefits, like I was saying earlier, by making small changes of what is possible, and that it doesn't cause, releasing frequently doesn't cause things to break. So take a small component of the platform, for example, or a piece of software, start releasing that in an automated way. Not completely automated, but in a frequent way, using a CI/CD pipeline, show how well that works, and then you can begin to break down that fear and that uncertainty. But yeah, for me, it's people are almost scared of making huge changes because what they've got just now is working fine. They might have problems, but it's working fine. So why would they want to change it massively and adopt a DevOps culture?
So fear of change. Okay. Anyone else?
No, I think Ali had covered that really well. I'll just sort of reiterate, it's, start small, break a piece of your monolith off and try and strangle it, I think is the phrase. And just piece by piece, do some experiments, try and test and learn. I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah.
Great. So just checking on the next question. I think the next question is about testing trends, and what testing trends do you see being adapted, I guess, in a sort of DevOps environment?
So some of the movements I've seen for UI testing, Cypress is coming up and everyone's getting quite excited about it. I personally used it and I've really enjoyed using some of the capabilities it offers.
Sorry, I didn't catch that. What did you mention a tool name?
Cypress.
Oh, Cypress. Okay.
For UI browser testing. I've also seen quite a lot of movement towards visual regression testing. If that's something you're not familiar with, I would suggest go checking it out. It's very, very good for assessing how pages should look visually. We have contract testing for microservices. So a lot of the architectures we're seeing here today using serverless, small microservices. How do we validate those services are working before we deploy into an environment? Contract testing is an awesome approach for doing that. And also containers as well. So if you're not already using containers for your testing, I'd recommend looking into doing something in that space. Containers enable this repeatable state. Bringing what you're deploying into production onto your local host is really powerful and makes your testing much more valuable as your environments are much more representative of each other. So those are some of the testing trends that I've noticed.
I would just, I think they're all really good, Matt. I'll just echo what you're saying around sort of visual testing. That's where I think tools like AI can help us as we go through a proliferation of, browser options on different operating systems. That is the kind of, tools like Applitools, visual testing can really, really help. And that is the kind of, value add that we could get out of AI, where a human just couldn't get through that kind of volume of visual testing or checking. So I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, I can echo what's been said here. And I think when it comes to AI and machine learning as well, I've seen tools that are trying to identify what tests should be run in a CI/CD pipeline based on not only like where the changes have been made in the application, but also how often tests have failed, or how often things have broken. They'll decide, well, let's run this test now, and that can obviously massively reduce the amount of time that your pipeline takes to run. So I think AI and machine learning will have an impact over the next couple of years.
Perfect. I mean, the actual next question is sort of tools related anyway, and it's around what tools have helped you working as a tester in a DevOps environment. And I think we've touched on that a little bit, but I don't know if there's anything else that you could expand around that, or perhaps even, on the flip side of that, you know, maybe talk about tools that are now not so relevant in the sort of new world of testing. You know, for someone like yourself, Alex, who's been in testing for a very long period of time, you know, maybe there's tools now that you would have used 10 years ago that you think, well, actually, that's not relevant in the testing world these days. I think you're on mute.
Sorry, I had one of those classic child interruption.
I'm sorry, I thought you were just cursing me for asking that question.
It was around tooling, and yeah, well, I think we've seen some of the big players in test tooling really struggle over the last few years, haven't we? The HP sale to Micro Focus was looks like it was an absolute coup at the time. They knew exactly what was going to happen. So big heavyweight test management tools are really less relevant. Obviously, you need to manage your tests, but there's much better and modern ways of doing that. And I haven't been at the cold face of testing for a few years now. The young guys like Ali and Matt are probably much more better placed. But I think in terms of testing fundamentally, I think, as we were discussing briefly earlier, it's really important that people understand the basics of testing. And the theory of it, and Ali mentioned boundary value analysis and the classic stuff like that, and equivalence partitioning, and the reasons why we test to provide information. It's really important, I think, for people who want a career in that to ground themselves with some of that theory before they jump into the new and exciting tools.
So just to add to that, sorry, Ali, you go.
No, on you go.
So I often see customers say, what tooling should we use? What's the prescriptive tooling for doing everything? I don't really believe in that at all. I very much think the test tooling you pick should match the architecture and the application you're building. So if you're building, for example, a Node web service, then probably pick a Node API test runner, sorry. So I think it shouldn't be prescriptive. It should depend on the application we're building.
Yeah, that's a great point. There's no, as I said earlier, there's no silver bullet with any of the tools that you're going to choose. It's what suits you and your team best. So I've always found that if you're starting with a new team and you want to introduce a new tool or a new framework, for example, it's best to stick with the language that the rest of the team's using, because then you have that support and that buy-in straight away. And I get that that's probably not true for every context, but it's been true where I've worked so far. And I think for me, one of the most valuable tools, and it's not just a tool, but like looking at our monitoring solutions, whatever we're using to monitor our application, that's been really useful for me as a tester. So seeing things like CPU usage or exceptions that are happening in our production environment that we might not be getting alerted on, it helps inform test ideas. So we might not know exactly what's going on to cause those errors. We should with observability, but sometimes it's not that easy. But it's good to see these exceptions and then use them to inform some testing ideas further down the line.
That's actually a really good point as well with the monitoring, is that you shouldn't just monitor things like CPU, but also business metrics as well can be really useful identifying problems. So say you've got a checkout, maybe we can be monitoring how many checkouts per minute. If that drops considerably, there's probably something going on. And that can be really useful for you as a tester to identify those kind of things.
Brilliant, thanks, Matt. I think actually we're pretty much coming to the end of our time, and am I right, Ali? We're pretty much up, aren't we, in terms of time? So yeah, thank you so much, panelists. That's been a really great discussion. Thanks everyone who's joined. Apologies if there's any questions we didn't get to answer. There's, I think, just one that we didn't get to answer, but I guess we can get in touch with that person and give our opinion on that. But thank everyone for joining. This is actually the sort of last of our scheduled sessions for Ask Me Anything at the moment, but please keep an eye out on our social media channels because I think we'll have some more coming up, and if not, we've got lots of other stuff going on. So yeah, just again, thanks to our panelists, thanks to everyone for joining. It's been a great session, and have a great weekend. Thanks everyone.
Cheers. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks all.